Next on Animator Talk, we discuss a one-of-a-kind film from the Walt Disney Animation Studios. While the studio had combined live action and animation for over 50 years at that time, they had never done it like this. Nor would they ever again. We're discussing Who Framed Roger Rabbit, coming up. Hey animation fans, Animator Talk here to celebrate our love and appreciation for the art of animation. When thinking back to the summer of 1988, it is impossible not to remember how a goofy white rabbit in red overalls took over the movie theaters and our hearts. Now this film begins with a cartoon, Something's Cookin', starring Roger Rabbit and his co-star Baby Herman. It harkens back to the good old days where every movie seen in a theater was preceded with a cartoon short. Sadly, this is no longer the norm, and hasn't been for quite some time, unless you're watching a Pixar film or a modern Disney animated feature. But this particular cartoon is full of Looney Tunes hijinks, lots of MGM-style violence toward the star, with Disney-quality animation, dazzling camera shots, and beautiful backgrounds that I argue you've never seen before. Once the cartoon ends with a refrigerator falling onto Roger's head. Oh, should I have a spoiler alert on this? Spoiler alert. Honestly, I'm going to spoil a lot of things except for the actual villain. Wait, was that a spoiler? You know what? This movie is over 30 years old. The embargo was lifted way back in 1988. So, pause this, go watch the movie, come on back. Once the cartoon ends with a refrigerator falling under Roger's head, the door swings open and the film opens up to live-action props and sets and human actors interacting with the cartoons. It was a transition done as remarkably well as when Dorothy opens her front door to transition from black and white to the color world of Oz. It was a clever gimmick that only Robert Zemeckis could pull off. And there we have a taste of how the film will go for the next 138 minutes.
Rabbits see stars, not birds. Stars! Can we lose the playback, please? You're killing me. For crying out loud, Roger!
Who Framed Roger Rabbit was based on the novel Who Censored Roger Rabbit by Gary Wolfe. Many of the thematic elements had to be toned way down, as this was a Disney production. Of course, they wouldn't release it under the Disney brand as the story couldn't be toned down enough. Fortunately, the studio had a secondary label, Touchstone, for just such an occasion. The story revolves around a murder mystery involving a cartoon mogul in 1947 Hollywood. Because he would get too close to Jessica Rabbit, Roger's wife, the police and detectives found Roger as suspect number one.
Just like a tune to drop a safe in a guy's head. Sorry, Eddie.
Seeking the aid of a private investigator, Roger meets Eddie Valliant, a down-on-his-luck PI. He's the human star played by Bob Hoskins. Roger finds sanctuary in Eddie's place with the utmost discretion.
Wait a minute. Anybody know you're here?
Nobody, not a soul except,
Who?
Well, you see, I didn't know where your office was, so I asked the newsboy. He didn't know, so I asked the fireman, the greengrocer, the butcher, the baker. They didn't know. But the liquor store guy, he knew.
Maybe not. Michael Eisner, who was rather new at Disney at the time, saw the complexity of this screenplay and knew it needed a heavy hitter to produce this film for success. He reached out to Amblin Entertainment's Steven Spielberg, who was thrilled that Disney wanted to team up on this film. The original budget was set at $50 million, which Disney felt was way too much money and reduced it to $30 million at greenlight. Steven Spielberg warned it wasn't realistic for the film they were looking for. Once production costs would exceed $30 million, Michael Eisner wanted to pull the plug. But Jeffrey Katzenberg argued that this film could be the very thing to revitalize the animation department. Steven's contract would give him majority of creative control in this film, and a large percentage of the box office that it would take in, while Disney would retain all merchandising rights, which is odd because they did so little merchandising. Robert Zemeckis was hired on to direct this film after his wild success with Back to the Future. Steven and he agreed to bring on his entire crew. Dean Cundey was brought in as his cinematographer. Cundey's very well versed in what Zemeckis' vision is for all of his shots. The slow panning, the all-encompassing single shots, the quirky nature of his comedy. Cundey was the only man for that job. Alan Silvestri was brought in as the composer for the score. Zemeckis would work closely with him in nearly all of his films since '84's Romancing the Stone. His callback to old detective movies balanced very well off of the zany cartoon themes, while keeping the rest of the score authentically Silvestri, with a very jazzy feel. I love this soundtrack so much. Of course, Zemeckis would admit that his knowledge of the animation process was very limited. He knew what he wanted, but he didn't have the experience with the medium. He needed an animation director. They found the perfect one in Richard Williams. Williams was a British-Canadian animator and animation director. His studio was primarily producing animation for commercials at the time. Now, Williams admitted he didn't care for the politics of Hollywood, so they accommodated him and moved the entire animation staff out to England. While discussing the realities of the animations process to Zemeckis and Spielberg, Williams would share the rules of animation. Set eye lines. In order to convincingly interact with the characters on screen, eye contact is essential. The jolly holiday sequences of Mary Poppins lacks believability, as Julie Andrews never locks eye contact with a single character.
I've seen other shows that have live-action animation combination, and the people aren't looking at them at all. And you can tell, even if they're looking at them, it looks like they're looking through them, not looking at them. It looks like they're looking into dead space, only at the same eye line.
Physical interaction. In order to believably exist on screen, the characters would need to interact with props and the settings. They would purposefully make Roger klutzy to push the reality by moving props. And finally, animation cameras stay still. In animation, as a general rule, the camera doesn't move. They would agree that all of these rules would need to be broken for the believability in this production. Get out of there! Every frame of film which would include an animated character would be printed out for the animator to accurately line up the character to the scene that they were in. To avoid floating characters and to ensure that the character would exist in the same frame as the actors. This was a necessary evil to make sure that they lived and breathed in the same dimensions. In creating the illusion that animated characters can interact with the live action so seamlessly was no easy feat. Animated characters would carry around real props, interact with real elements such as water and vice versa. It took many talented artisans to collaborate to create convincing effects. Puppeteers would control moving props, carrying prop guns on wires or poles, controlling breakaway furniture. Cameramen needed to be well rehearsed to make sure they made their marks on the film. And animators were moved from Burbank to Europe to work with some of the most talented animators Europe had to offer. They had to come up with clever solutions in the event the actor didn't quite make eye lines, or if a mechanical device couldn't avoid being filmed. The supervising animator of Roger Rabbit was none other than the great Andreas Deja. When Bob Hoskins' eyes were aimed too high, Andreas would find ways of hiking Roger up on furniture or stand him on his tiptoes. When Hoskins was looking too low, Rogers would feel nervous and cower a little. He adapted his height like a pro. In the scene where Roger explains how he found Eddie in the first place, he jumps up onto the bed to give his lines. Hoskins is looking up too early, so Andreas compensates by throwing Roger's hand up to gesture, giving Hoskins something to look at. It's so clever. He's amazing. Now, admittedly, there was a little rotoscoping done in this film. Rotoscoping is usually something of an insult to animators, but it was necessary. See, rotoscoping is when you take a filmed model and you trace the footage frame by frame to animate a character realistically. When devising how to convincingly animate Jessica Rabbit's routine in the Ink and Paint Club, there was no other way to have her interact with the audience members at times. If you pay close attention to Jessica's figure, you'll notice her waistline or her arms suddenly resemble a natural physique when physically interacting with the men's clothing or props. The differences are so subtle, you may not have noticed them before, but us animation enthusiasts have been studying the effect for years. It's genius. It was known to be the most difficult sequence to pull off in the film. With the camera movements, the actors and props, the lighting, and the sequins. All of those sequins on her gown had the effects crew pulling out their hair. They would end up compositing footage of light reflecting off a plastic bag scraped with steel wool to get the right effect. Genius! To the outside observer, this film's production had its oddities. Rubber stand-ins were used to assist actors who had to interact with nothing more than direction and their imagination, while animators used them for size and dimension for reference, not to mention light and shadow. Actors had to imagine co-stars to the point where Bob Hoskins admitted to hallucinations of animated characters in his off time. It required him to take a year off of acting afterward. And while it's routine to have voice actors off camera feeding lines to on-screen talent, it's not common for them to dress the part.
Please, Raoul, I can give you stars. Just toss the refrigerator on my head one more time.
Charles Fleischer had costuming create a full body costume for him. From his rabbit feet, red overalls, and bow tie to rabbit ears. Talk about method acting. Actors from neighboring stages would see him and question Disney's production quality. This film was a love letter to the golden age of animation. There are animated cameos throughout, not to mention the Easter eggs. The Easter eggs. So many classic cartoon characters would be added into scenes and sequences all the while, being very careful to remember what year the film takes place. The film would feature Pinocchio and Dumbo, but you wouldn't find any characters out of time, with the exception of Roadrunner and Coyote. But that was at the insistence of Robert Zemeckis, and they go highly unnoticed anyway. And speaking of Looney Tunes characters, in order to really sell cartoons coexisting within the real world, you can't only star Disney characters. Steven Spielberg would reach out to Warner Brothers, King Features, Walter Lantz Productions, Fleischer Studios, and the like to lend their characters to the production. Some studios jumped at the chance of making their characters relevant again, while others shared stipulations on how the characters would be portrayed. In getting Warner Brothers to give permission to use their characters for this film, conditions were agreed to. Bugs Bunny would have to have at least equal screen time and lines of dialogue to that of Mickey Mouse. The same would be said of Daffy and Donald Duck. They would share the screen together or not at all, and Daffy would be at least as equally talented at the piano. There would be notes on how Daffy and others were animated. Warner wanted the characters animated to the current model sheets of the 1980s. When they saw Daffy Duck was animated with Bob Clampett's model sheets, they demanded that he be reanimated with Chuck Jones models in mind. Zemeckis knew that Daffy's model in 1947 featured Clampett's design, so he merely asked the animation team to animate the scene again to send to Warner to appease them and keep the original animation in the film. Zemeckis knew there would likely never be another studio team-up again, so he didn't worry about any repercussions once this film was released. And let's be honest, their characters were never better animated than they were in this film.
Yeah, ain't I a stinker?
All attention to detail will be paid to this film. Disney Animation was always known for their illusion of life in their animated films. The characters had to be convincing in the real world. Not only would their animation be top-notch, but their surrounding set had to interact with the character. But the moving camera and the angles and lighting would be taken into consideration.
Where can I drop it? Somewhere we can hide.
Now this leads me to bumping the lamp, which separates the animation enthusiast with the casual moviegoer. But I urge you guys, stick with me because this is actually wicked cool, okay? In the scene where Eddie smuggles Roger into Dolores' bar, Dolores then brings them into the back, into the rot-gut room. Eddie hits his head on a low-hanging lamp. The regular moviegoer might wonder if this was an accident, move on. Others may not notice it at all, but Eddie continually hits that lamp, causing it to sway back and forth while the characters lay out tons and tons of important exposition. We're concerned with Eddie sawing away at his handcuffs, only to notice that the light and shadow moving all around the room has to go across Bob Hoskins and thus across Roger. Shading, shadowing, all of that was hand-painted. Frame by frame, each cell, they have to give believability to the lighting effects, and the casual moviegoer never even notices it. The lamp even shines through Roger's ears a little when behind him. To this day, Disney animation refers to going above and beyond what is called for in a scene for believability to bumping the lamp. Now, Roger Rabbit would be voiced by Charles Fleischer, a comedic actor known for his time on Welcome Back, Kotter and his stand-up routines, while Jessica Rabbit would be voiced by Kathleen Turner.
You don't know how hard it is being a woman looking the way I do.
You couldn't find a bigger name in Hollywood at that time. Her sultry, husky voice was perfect for playing the seductive siren of an animated character.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
Now, with the inclusion of the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes characters, Mel Blanc would finally get to shine in a Disney picture. With aging, his voices that he has performed for over 40 years would sound differently in the 1980s. But he approached that microphone and he performed the hell out of it. His classic voices sound as fresh as they did in 1941. I don't know how he did it, but the proof is in the film for all of history. The late and great Bob Hoskins would play Eddie Valliant. He would admit in interviews many years later that even though it was a mentally challenging role for him, this film was one of his favorites on his roster. Joanna Cassidy would play Eddie's on-again, off-again girlfriend, Dolores, the bartender at the bar that Eddie would frequent. The role of Judge Doom would be played by Zemeckis' favorite, Christopher Lloyd. Lloyd found this role very rewarding, as he finally got the delicious role of playing a villain, and would stick close to Zemeckis after shooting was completed, as the two of them would head back to Universal's lot to shoot Back to the Future 2 immediately after. Oh hey, did you know?
Check it out.
Harrison Ford was originally offered to play the role of Eddie Valliant. Steven Spielberg thought he'd be perfect for the role. They passed when his asking price was way out of budget. Tim Curry had auditioned for the role of Judge Doom. Zemeckis, Spielberg, Katzenberg, and Eisner would all agree that his portrayal was far too frightening, and they passed. Now, this film has more than one Star Wars tie. Lieutenant Santiago was played by Richard LeParmentier.
Come on, Eddie, let's get this over with.
He played previously General Marty.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
It was he who was force choked by Darth Vader in the original Star Wars film. Mae Castell, the original voice of Betty Boop, returned to reprise her role that made her so famous more than 55 years prior.
But I still got it, Eddie. Boop, boop-be-doo.
You may know her better as the confused Aunt Bethany from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Is your house house on fire, Clark?
No, Bethany, those are Christmas lights.
Don't throw me down, Clark.
I'll try not to, Aunt Bethany.
Is this the airport, Clark?
We're here!
You know, you shouldn't have done that.
Oh, dear. Did I break wind?
Who Framed Roger Rabbit was released on June 22nd of 1988. Its opening weekend box office take was over $11 million, which was the highest opening weekend for a Buena Vista film at the time. It would gross $156 million domestically and $340 worldwide, which meant that it was the 20th highest grossing film of all time. It was the second highest grossing film of the year, right behind Rain Man. The critics fell all over themselves in acclaim for this film. Roger Ebert gave the film 4 out of 4 stars, saying it was the type of word of mouth that money can't buy. He said this movie isn't only great entertainment, but also a breakthrough in craftsmanship, while Gene Siskel praised the film as dazzling and jaw-dropping. Then they discussed the opening 4-minute sequence, and while sharing the sequence took 9 months to animate, it was done beautifully. Both Siskel and Ebert would spend much of that single episode analyzing the painstaking filmmaking that was used to create this film. In a time before computer animation was widely used, this film was all hand-drawn and on celluloid. Optical compositing was how it was all assembled. Post-production would take up to 14 months to complete. Robert Zemeckis wanted realism in his animation, and he would get it. This film was groundbreaking on so many levels. It's a shame there wouldn't be another film like it. There was talk of a sequel, then talks of a prequel. The trouble in getting a decent story together made Spielberg less interested. He continued with talks, but agreed to making 3 cartoon shorts instead. Once computer animation proved successful, Disney approached Spielberg again with a test reel using a computer-animated Roger.
So what do you think, big fella?
It lacked all integrity in the character, and he refused to have anything to do with it. Contracts would soon expire, and all ideas of continuing Roger Rabbit's story were null and void. This film happened at the perfect time. It was an amazing example of how far you could stretch animation to its full potential. Michael Eisner, who in my opinion was at his very best at this time, knew this feature needed the best of the best to pull it off, and it had all the right talents involved. It couldn't have been done by anybody else. And just as Jeffrey Katzenberg predicted, the success of this film would revitalize the public's interest in classic cartoons and what Disney would have in store for the future. Immediately following this film would be a resurgence at the studio known as the Disney Renaissance period. Disney would enjoy the success of its next film, Oliver and Company, then its followed film, The Little Mermaid, and, well, we all know what happens from there. I invite you to pop this film back into your Blu-ray player with a big tub of popcorn. Don't bother looking for all those urban legends with the pause button. All of that existing footage was removed a long time ago. Just watch this film for what it is, an absolute masterpiece. Until next time, you keep moving forward.
That's all, folks.